Welcome, everybody. I'm very excited. I'm your host, Rabbi Drew Kaplan. I'm very excited to have, I'll just call him first time guest, Rabbi Moshe Smolkin, the head rabbi, right? Is that the senior rabbi?
Yeah. At
Senior
Edith Israel,
at
yeah.
Adith Israel. And some of you may know him, may have met him. I know the pandemic hit, it's been almost a year now, but how many times had you visited Cedar Village prior to the pandemic?
Well, I visited a few times prior to the pandemic, but I wish I could have visited more. Who knew this would happen, and what a wild world we're living in. And at least I got to meet a few folks before the whole pandemic hit. So,
Yeah.
and I'm grateful for that in terms of the congregation as a whole. That thank God, I was able to at least meet a number of folks in the few months, before this whole thing hit. But just wishing everyone, of course, good health, and everyone should take care. And I'm so grateful now that we have vaccines. I'm grateful that you've had the vaccine.
Yes.
It really is a mitzvah. It really is a mitzvah in terms of taking care of health. So God willing, people will be safe, and maybe things can start to open up over the next year. So
Absolutely. So I'm going to take that in two different directions. I really was just asking in case people were familiar with Rabbi Smokin here. So on the one hand, that's great that you visited pre-pandemic, and so anybody who, whether Adith Israel members or otherwise, may have seen Rabbi Smokin walking the halls pre-pandemic in better times, I guess, more freer times. And but yes, as Rabbi Smolkin mentioned, yes, last week we got our second dose of the vaccine, so hope is on the horizon. We can start to hopefully soon open up, but certainly we have, we're doing our part in defeating this virus. So
yeah, I'm into that.
yeah. Alrighty, so we have Rabbi Smolkin here. Very special opportunity to discuss the parsha this week, which is
Yeah,
Yitro.
what is the parsha this week?
It's Yitro.
It's Yitro.
Yes.
So whenever we hear Yitro, we're thinking of not just, of course, Moshe's father-in-law, but this is the parsha we got the Decalogue. So we're very, very excited to get those 10 words once again, known in common parlance as the 10 Commandments. And really, it's like, to me, I don't know about you, I get like so excited for it. Because this is like our people are like right there standing at the mountain of God. Back in the beginning of Exodus, it actually mentions about the mountain of God. Moshe has this encounter with God at the burning bush, the mountain of God, and then there's even a thing saying that they'll be back. They'll come worship me at this mountain. And now
Oh
they're
wow.
back at the mountain. So it's really kind of a cool thing that, like, what started off at the beginning, here it is kind of coming to fruition.
It's like a
And
literary envelope.
oh, let's say it again.
Like a literary envelope. It
That's
returns
right.
back to, it
That's
connects
right.
back.
That's right. Very much. Yeah. It circles back. Here
Yep.
we're finally back at kind of what was alluded to in the beginning of Exodus, this mountain of God. Now the people are finally there. And it was kind of true, right in the beginning, that kind of what Moshe was saying to Pharaoh about, like, hey, we're going to bring these people out and they're going to go and worship God at the mountain of God, and then there they are. They're
Yeah.
finally there. And the whole kind of struggle between, like, so to speak, God versus this false god of Pharaoh, right? That gets defeated and was not the true God. And it's like, who are we going to worship, and what is this freedom for? So now we're finally there, kind of connecting with God, with Hashem, and getting that deeper connection that kind of started this whole thing, is realizing, like, the people, even them becoming a people, right, is like, now here they are as one people at Mount Sinai, and of course that famous story of, Vayichan, and that they camped is written in the singular, like they camped like one person, so they're all together, the ganze mishpacha, the whole family is there at Mount Sinai. And and last week in synagogue we stood,
Mm.
right? And when I say in synagogue, of course, we're not physically in the synagogue all together, but in our homes, I said, like, okay, please rise for the crossing of the Reed Sea,
Hmm.
right? Because when our ancestors went through that sea, they were, of course, up, they were marching. And so traditionally, and this is Exodus 15, like, we stand to kind of get it in our minds, like, to help us imagine and feel that sense of what is it like going through the sea. So this is here we are, we're the next week, and we're going to be standing again. It's like during the Torah reading, these people are always standing up. But so
Yeah.
here we're standing because we're kind of imagining what is it like to actually be there at Mount Sinai? And I don't know. I don't know. Are we going for it? Do we want to like recreate that in our minds? What do you think? Are you like,
What, that we should stand up on this recording right now?
no? Oh yeah, no. We
Oh,
could,
oh.
like, what would it be like to be there? Would you sign up for that? If someone said, hey, you want to be there at the mountain at Mount Sinai when God's giving the revelation? Are you like, yeah, sign me up? I want that. I want to sign up for that.
I don't know, and I'll tell you why. At the end, after the Decalogue, after the Ten Commandments are delivered, they protest. The children of Israel protest. Stop! We can't. We could die. Like this is just not tenable. It's not physically sustainable for us to continue hearing God.
Yeah, and I think that's the part where I go like, there's so many people like, I wanna see God, I wanna like connect with God more deeply, and I'm kind of like, yes, I do want to have a deeper connection with God, and there's like a little bit too much is too much, and I think that's that point. It's kind of nice. It's so nice for us that we have the Torah, so we can kind of get these lessons about, oh, could there be too much God in your life? Well, yeah, according to these folks who actually went through it, you're exactly right. They were kind of like, it's a little too much. And I think that's why, in some ways, it can be so easy for us just to kind of read the text and, and kind of, as we're reading the text, oh, yeah, people there at Sinai and the voices and the lightning, that sounds good. And
so what's really fascinating to me, it's one thing I think that God is speaking, but I think it's more than just some sort of speaking, because it also, I think there's something also in the air, the sounds, the visuals. It's a whole audio-visual experience, but it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. Who knows? We don't know about the level of volume, or there's thunder. It's quite the scene, and it's more than just God speaking. I mean, I think God speaking sounds too unidimensional. I think it's a lot more complex than that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that they talk about like this word synesthesia, right? Where we can kind of, where your senses are perceiving things in different ways, where you see sound, for example, right? Those things. And apparently there are people that can kind of do that, right? They actually, like, when there are sounds going on, maybe they see different colors and things like that. Different folks kind of have experiences like that. But I think you're right. I think it's kind of like so much energy in the communication, and how do we communicate? I mean, even now, what's so amazing, Rabbi Kaplan, is here you and I we're actually communicating not with just regular sound, we're communicating like through a computer. I don't know, it's like beaming off and hitting some satellite and coming back. I mean, it's all kinds of different energies, and the computer has to kind of like translate it almost, right? All of those zeros and ones, whatever's being sent.
And even better, normally I record it on the computer. This is even being recorded in the cloud. So it's even all the more so just one place and
literally
another.
Up in the clouds, like where Moshe went, right?
There we go. Nice connection.
Right.
Nice
so
connection.
there's a part actually that I always love, that it's in the davening, where it talks about Moshe bringing down the tablets. And lahorid is the verb that's used. So lahorid is to bring down, but he's bringing down the tablets. But in modern Hebrew, it means to download. So he's literally like downloading it on the tablet. Very modern, understanding of like, what is it?
And it still works in a contemporary,
And it still works. That's right. Downloading it on the tablets. Absolutely. Yeah. So the whole scene to me it's kind of wild, and that's why I'm glad there's this tradition to stand up during the Torah reading, because like, as much as we can kind of get any type of sense of what it was like without actually being there to get our like circuits fried is probably like a good thing. But I think so part of what was on my mind, as I had shared with you, is here's this revelation at Sinai, and how did it go? And was it kind of like, as you said, it seems like it was more than just the voice of God. Right, whatever, and what does that mean? Often we have kind of like a low voice associated, but it's funny, and often just kind of in our society we put that in a low male voice rather than a high-pitched voice, or the voice we get. There's actually beautiful midrashim in our tradition that I love, that talk about like, what is the voice of God, that everyone heard their own voice. Which is kind of, whoa, It's kind of a little different. There's also ideas like everyone heard like what they were able to perceive. Ze'eli v'yanvehu, right? From this is Exodus
Earlier in
15,
Exodus.
right? This is my God, and I will praise God. That every person actually experienced God directly there, and that sense of like every single Israelite, was having this perception of God, and that sages say like that was even more exalted than like what the prophets later on would perceive. Right. And again, that's in the Midrash, but the sense of like every person was kind of given what they could receive, maybe even in their voice. Like, what did it sound like? What did they perceive? But then there's the other question, about were there words? Were there particular words? What did, and there are different ideas about that, right? Did they hear the Decalogue, right? Like in the Decalogue, the first two are in I statements, but then it goes to, right, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain, right? It's not I, right? So then this whole question of like, I am Hashem, your God, who took you out of Egypt, right? You shall have no other gods before me. Like maybe the people didn't hear all of the Decalogue even. Maybe they just heard the first two names. And then there's a Hasidic reading that I love, which of course is like, what the people heard was the letter Aleph of Anochi. That's what they heard.
Okay.
And of course, the letter Aleph by itself is silent.
I'm curious what the motivation, the motivation to limit it to just one letter.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Why this Hasidic interpretation? I don't know. I think maybe it's trying to get it that it was beyond just language, right? That they got, that sense of just getting a download. In the movie The Matrix, right? The main character gets like an immediate download and suddenly knows kung fu. Like I know kung fu, right? It's Keanu Reeves, right? Yeah. I don't know if you remember that one, but it's like, were these things in sentences or were they ideas? Right. And I think like Shabbat is an interesting one for me to think about because, of course, here we have this interesting discrepancy between literally the first few words of the mitzvah of Shabbat between Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5. Right. Is it Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, the Kadsho, right? Is it remember Shabbos to keep it holy, or is it Shamor, right? To guard. It was actually so, this comes up, of course, in the Chadodi. Shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad hishviyani, right? So, Shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad, like this is what our tradition kind of did with it. But the challenge is you actually have it written differently within the Torah, going between, like there's a different way it's written. Remember Shabbos, that's in Exodus. Guard Shabbos, that's in Deuteronomy. Which is kind of like what was really said. Like you could ask this question, like, no, but which one of them did God say?
I mean, there's lots of interpretive strategies to deal with that. I mean, on the one hand, you could, as you mentioned, what the 4th century sage Rava did was just to say, well, they were really said at the same time. And so they just got unpacked differently in the books of Exodus and Deuteronomy. That's one interpretive strategy. You could say they're two sides of the same coin. There's lots of different ways of approaching it. Why not? Or we could, there's that, I think 90s cereal commercial. Why not both? And
why not both? And that's, I think the funny thing is, I think the Jewish tradition like often went with that way about why not both? Two words, remember and, guard at the exact same time. Like in English, it's remember guard, or guard remember, or like, how do you say it exactly at the same time? But I kind of like the idea of it being the principle of Shabbat, the idea of Shabbat. And by the way, in Shamor v'Zachor b'dibor echad, right, in L'chadodi, I finally realized like a few years ago, I kind of I had this like question in my mind, like, why isn't it Zachor and then Shamor? Like, why did the author of L'chadodi write it that way in the song? Shouldn't he have put Exodus first and then Deuteronomy? And
right.
And I finally figured out it's because he spells his name Shlomo, Rav Shlomo Alkabetz is the author of it. And in order to spell Shlomo, he needed the Shamor from Deuteronomy to come first. and then he
Nice.
could put the Zachor, you know. So that's how we got it, because of writing his name. But you know, that idea of they're together, like, I think it was kind of a download, right? It's just, this is an idea, right? What was it really? But I
Well,
kind
it's
of
not.
wonder about, here's the principle of Shabbat.
Mhm. Well, I was thinking about packaging and opening, of thinking, I don't know how much people listening to this necessarily know a lot about computers or files, but sometimes when people send files or download files, or otherwise access and get them, they are zipped up, right? And so
Yes.
they're packaged more more
Compact.
tidily, more compactly, right? So they're more compact, but then you have to do something to then extract. You have to open them up
Yes.
and expand them, and that's what it sounds like here. Whether you want to take that Hasidic version, whether it's just the singular letter of Aleph and then it was unpacked from there, or just those first two that were addressed to the Jewish people and then unpacked from there. Also, I want to go back to another thing you mentioned, which was, what does it even sound like? What do these things even sound like? And we have, even in verse 19 of chapter 19, even preceding chapter 20, where Moses is talking, and then God
Yes.
answers to him in thunder. And so
Yeah.
that, I think, I don't know how the Ten Commandments actually sounded. Were they
Right.
just simply words, or were they thunderously?
Right.
And then, which definitely plays up the mortal danger that the Israelites felt themselves in, of like, there's so much thunder, this is crazy, we could
Right.
die, this is not safe. So I think that could be another aspect. How really was it uploaded or downloaded, or and how did they then unpack and unstract? And I think that goes back also even to this shamor v'zachor, the remembering
Right.
and guarding of the Sabbath day to sanctify it.
But I love your idea about the zip file also. It's right.
Mm.
It's like, here's the whole idea of Shabbos. We're gonna like just put it in your minds.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, in order to get Shabbos really does have both remember and guard. So I just want to, for folks listening in, you know, just to kind of back up, like, guarding Shabbos is kind of creating the space for Shabbos, right? So we're not always running around and working. We gotta that's the shamor is often the idea of like, stop.
Mm.
Like, stop doing these different things to create. We need to intentionally create space in our lives
Mm.
in order to have a space for Shabbos. And the Zachor is like filling that space. So we remember Shabbos by filling it with things like lighting candles,
Mm.
or saying the blessing over the wine or grape juice, having challah, maybe singing, you know, songs that are either zmiras, you know, different traditional Jewish songs that we sing on Shabbos, or doing certain prayers or reading Torah, right? We fill it with different things during the day. And it's this, but the truth is, like, those are interwoven, because if we just try and like have, I'm gonna light the candles, but then I'm immediately going back to work, that's not Shabbos,
Mm.
right? That wouldn't really be that, you know, to me, actually, it's like, I'm even imagining it. It's like painful to kind of imagine, right?
Mm.
Because it doesn't feel like you know, if you have just, we're going to do some things to kind of remember it, but we're just going to keep working through it, it's like missing something. And alternatively, if you just had that time and it was blank, like, we're going to create a time, but we're not actually going to light candles, and we're not going to have the blessing of the wine or challah or anything, or connect with synagogue and community and the Jewish people or Torah, like, it also would feel kind of blank,
Mm.
and that it's missing something. So, you know, again, I'm thinking about like trying to understand, you know, this kind of model of maybe it was like a zip drive, and in the zip drive, like, it's all compact. Here's the idea of Shabbos, right? It's like they suddenly, boom, Shabbos, right? But then it's like, when you write it down, it's hard to write all of that down, right? And
Yeah.
so the Torah actually, by having it in some ways in two different verbs, right, in different places, the Torah actually kind of fills in the idea and can give us the basics of what we need to have an idea of Shabbos.
Mm-hmm. Another way, this just occurred to me just right now, is instead of Rava's opinion, that was that third century rabbi I mentioned in Babylonia. So another way of thinking about it is, yes, remember is what God said, but Moses his riff in Deuteronomy is that
Right.
there's a guarding that's necessary. And look, Moses can, he continually expands on various things in the book of Deuteronomy that preceded it in the Torah.
That's
And
right.
and so this could also, even, working off of what you were saying, could provide that protective fence around simply the remembering
Yes.
Shabbat.
Good, good.
It helps in this guarding, helps protect, helps sanctify
Right, right.
the
It's the next
remembrance of Shabbat.
elaboration in order to make it really possible. Here's
Right.
what we do. Right.
Yeah.
And that's a cool way of thinking about it also, is like, well, we have the remembering, but it keeps getting blown out because we go right back to work and things keep interrupting it. We really need to guard or put a siag Torah, a fence around the Torah, to
Right.
kind of, it's
Right. And
like,
there's plenty of those examples, including, even, spoiler alert, next week's Torah portion about not allowing witches to live. Yet in Deuteronomy, we get an expansion, not simply witches, but necromancers, diviners, all sorts of folks.
right,
And so we see a lot of expansion from Moses, although we could say, going back to the sort of everything being said, Moses had this direct revelation from God. And so he has a good sense of what needs to be further unpacked in the book of Deuteronomy.
right.
This is not the verbatim stuff that we get from Exodus from God. This is Moses, his telling of
Well,
things.
and that's that whole sense of like that the oral tradition was given at the same time as the written tradition, and
Uh-huh.
maybe even first,
Mm,
right? That it came kind of, here's the concept, we're having a conversation, and then here we go, we're going to write it down,
mm.
and what gets written down when, and maybe, like you're saying, initially it gets written down with remember, and then later on it's like, you got to guard this, otherwise it's not
Yeah.
going to happen, you
Right.
know. So I like these ideas. Again, I think Shabbat for me was kind of an interesting example to think about what was revealed, how was it revealed, how do we understand things today? I think that's a great example in part. Like, I like what you're saying about Moshe needed to add in a certain sense to kind of in Deuteronomy to make sure that there was this extra protection or extra layer for the people so that they could live it.
Yeah.
And it kind of is meaningful to me because I think about the different layers of Jewish tradition, not just on Shabbat, but on many things that we know were kind of added over time
Hmm.
to help support that initial revelation. And part of it is like, okay, but how are we going to live it? What are we going to actually do? Like,
Right. And it sounds like, almost, now that I'm thinking about it, it's one thing for God to say, remember it. But Moses, by the time we get to the book of Deuteronomy, having lived through the experience, having lived many Shabbats, he realizes something else should be included. Guard it. You can't just have it and remember it. You need to set aside guarding for it as well.
yeah, that's beautiful.
Mhm.
There's a lot of that in life, right? We have these experiences, and maybe, for folks who are watching this, maybe you've had certain experiences where if you were writing your Torah down, right, so to speak, everyone has their Torah, their teaching. This comes actually from Psalm 1. Over Torah to yageh yomam v'layla, right? It says that, that the person will recite, so to speak, it uses kind of that language that's gendered, but his Torah, he'll recite his Torah day and night, right? And his, in the context of the first Psalm, probably means God's Torah. But the sages take it to be his, like the person, each individual, right? So there's an idea from that first Psalm that like every single person has Torah to teach. And it's interesting, Rabbi Kaplan, to think about kind of about maybe how maybe I would have written Torah a certain way a decade ago,
Mm.
right? And what would I have written down? But then, I've experienced certain things in my life. I'm going to need to, when I do my Deuteronomy version of it, right?
Yeah.
There's my Exodus version of my Deuteronomy. When I get to Deuteronomy, I'm like, and also here are these
Yeah.
other pieces, right?
Yeah.
And that's like for Moshe is like, well, Moshe Rabbeinu, here he's about to like lead them actually there. He's finishing up. I like Deuteronomy is like, I think about like students, they've studied the whole semester and now they're ready for the test. And the teacher does this like, all right, class, we're doing a big review here right before the test, right? That's kind of
Mm.
like Deuteronomy, right?
Yeah.
Because is like the whole Torah, and then all Deuteronomy is like, okay, lessons right before the people go into their land. This is the final little bit. Let's do a little review, folks. But during the review, sometimes the teacher's like, yeah, and also this and this and this, So maybe for folks who are watching, maybe you have your Torah, so to speak, that you would have come up with earlier in your life, and now you realize, hey, there are these other pieces, or maybe there are loved ones that you have in your life that you've kind of tried to lead or help or teach about certain things, and now you're like, and you should also kind of think about this, in order to really get that concept I was showing you.
Yeah,
So
it's interesting. I mean, it's one I can go in two directions. The first, what I was simply thinking before you got to the different times in one's life, what I was simply thinking is it's one thing for God to tell us, but it's another thing for it to be lived. And sometimes it's one thing for directions to be given, but then you realize, yeah, there's some realistic, real life applications that some good, stuff that pops up along the way. The other thing I was thinking about as far as writing different pieces of advice or observations throughout one's life reminds me of the way that the rabbis understand uh, David, King David, where they understand. I'm sorry, not King David, Solomon, where they understand him to be writing Song of
oh yeah,
Songs,
yeah,
this like love poem, which is dripping with romantic imagery and
yeah,
all that
yeah, yeah.
stuff. When he's young, he's got a lot of energy, and then later on in life, he writes proverbs when he's a little bit older,
Yeah, and
more
then
middle-aged. He has
Ecclesiastes,
he
and
has
then
he has useful being productive person of society. And then later, much later on in life, when he's an older guy, he writes Ecclesiastes, where he's it's a very different take on life, let's just say. And so that's what it seems to me. The rabbis recognize that happens in people's life. They have one would write different things about life as one proceeds throughout life.
yeah, I think that's part of the kind of amazing thing when we think about the revelation, both on the sense of like how old were all the people getting it and what did they hear, like probably depended what they understood, probably depended on their life experiences then, but also our people, Am Yisrael, right? The people of Israel was young, right? So that was our kind of our moment, like our first like initiation. It's like, wow, there are things even for our like B'nai Mitzvah students that we work with, like that we'll say to them like, hey, we're able to talk about this with you now, like Noah, Noah and the animals, right, in the flood, like, hey, when you were little, like we look at the cute little animals going aboard, and don't worry about I mean, the story is kind of like a wild, very challenging, I don't know if that I'm old enough to read that story, honestly. I mean, it's because all these other animals and all these other people get wiped out, right?
Mhm.
But that's not what we talk about with little kids. Like with little
Mm.
kids, we're kind of like, look at the cute little pairs of animals, two
Yeah.
koalas, they're going on the ark, how cute, right? And so it's only like when they're B'nai Mitzvah that we might go and say like, yeah, let's read that story again. Do you know this story? Oh yeah, I know that story. And then sometimes the kids, they're finally like actually reading the text and going like, oh golly,
Which, by the way, happens any age. It could be people in their 20s and 30s. They could be in their 80s or 90s. They see the same stuff they saw as when they were much younger, perhaps even kids, and it's a vastly different story, almost as if they had never encountered it before.
Yeah. And that's why I kind of love that in some ways the Torah was given, these concepts were given, but we're growing as a people. Like we're continuing to get older and develop and understand things in different ways that we couldn't have really understood it in a certain sense back then.
Yeah.
And that's why sometimes I'm really as a rabbi, I'm so grateful to our tradition, because it has all of this wisdom throughout centuries of development,
Hmm.
right? That we've continued to learn and think and process this information to kind of see, what was given then, and now how can we understand it in light of our experience as a people, and even of course as our experience as individuals. So
Right, which is a wonderful opportunity that we keep coming back over and over again to the Torah, even this week, and reading the Ten Commandments. So the
yeah,
Torah portion discussion that I had with the residents, which hopefully people are watching, I got to perceive it with a totally different set of eyes than I looked at it before, with thinking about why are there particular reasons given in the Ten Commandments for certain mitzvot presented. So for me, and maybe next year it'll be something different. Every year presents there's always something that pops up.
yes.
Um, yeah.
Well, and that's the other reason, to kind of think about this way of studying Torah, which I love. That we every year we read it again, and amazingly, sometimes I wonder. It's like, did someone put that in there? Like, why didn't I see that last year? Did someone just stick this year? It's like, what's going on?
It's
But
funny
it's
because
like,
it's funny, but it's funny because it's true also.
it's true, right? Because
Yeah.
and it's not so to speak that the Torah is different, but that because we're different, we're able to receive that Torah, and get it. Notain HaTorah, as the blessing goes, right? The Torah blessing is that God is in the present tense giving the Torah. It wasn't just that God gave, but God is always giving Torah, and maybe we're still kind of hearing that voice of Sinai.
Yeah. Wow, that's great.
So
cool.
This has been such a pleasure to kibitz with you about Torah, folks. I hope that y'all enjoyed, and that it's inspiring for you, and that this year you can kind of open up to your Torah, and where are you, and what revelations are you having this day as you're hearing this and thinking about this, and where you are in your life at this point. And it's kind of exciting to me always that Judaism, we're getting the Torah, the teaching, always about education and learning and growth. So
yes, and
it's
also
exciting.
thinking, and also unpacking and thinking about it too.
Yeah. Amen.
All right. So I'm very glad I was able to bring Rabbi Smolkin to you here at Cedar Village. So Rabbi Smolkin, thank you so much for coming on through.
Thank you so much. It's really been an honor and lots of fun talking with you. So
yes,
tremendous thank yous, and thank you all for watching as well. And I hope you enjoy this parsha.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. And Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat